Okay, so you sent over a whole bunch of research about how important questioning skills are,
Hmm.
especially for students.
Yeah.
And I got to admit, it's not something I've ever really thought about deeply.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
We often focus on teaching kids the right answers, but what if we equipped them with the skills to ask better questions instead?
Hmm.
Think about it. The ability to ask the right questions, that's like having a superpower in a world that's constantly changing.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Like the future is this big unknown, so having a solid questioning framework could help them navigate, right?
Absolutely. And it's not just about futuristic scenarios either.
Yeah.
These skills are applicable right now in
Right.
any learning environment.
Hmm.
One of the articles you shared talked about how questioning can revolutionize traditional subjects like math.
Math. Really?
Mm.
I always thought of math as being all about formulas and getting the right answer,
Right.
not exactly a question-driven subject.
That's a common misconception. But imagine if instead of just memorizing formulas, students were encouraged to ask, why does this rule work? Or how can I represent this problem in different ways?
Hmm.
Suddenly, math becomes less about rote memorization and more about exploration and understanding.
That's a cool way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's like shifting from just finding the answer
Yeah.
to understanding the why behind the answer.
Exactly.
So where do we even begin? How do we help students, and maybe even ourselves, become better question askers?
Well, the first step is recognizing that not all questions are created equal.
Okay.
There are closed questions which have a single right answer, like what is the capital of France?
Hmm.
These are important for building foundational knowledge,
Right.
but the real magic happens with open questions.
The ones that spark debate and get you thinking, right? Like, what are the pros and cons of different forms of government?
Exactly. Open questions don't have one right answer,
Yeah.
so they push us to think critically,
Right.
consider different perspectives, and even challenge our own assumptions.
And this is precisely the kind of thinking that students need to develop to thrive in the future.
So teachers have a huge role to play in fostering a questioning culture in the classroom. But how do they actually do that?
It starts with modeling.
Okay.
Kids are like sponges. They
Yeah.
absorb everything they see and hear.
Mm-hmm.
If teachers are constantly asking thought-provoking questions, students will naturally start to do the same.
Right.
And it's not just about the questions they ask the students. It's
Yeah.
also about the questions they ask themselves out loud.
Okay.
Like, I wonder why that experiment didn't work as expected.
So it's like teachers are demonstrating that it's okay to be curious,
Yeah.
to not have all the answers,
Right.
and to use questions as a tool for exploration.
Precisely. And the research you sent over highlighted some specific strategies that teachers can use to really structure their questioning and make it more intentional.
Yeah, okay.
Have you heard of Bloom's taxonomy?
Vaguely.
I think it has something to do with different levels of thinking,
Yeah.
but honestly, I'm a bit fuzzy on the details.
It's actually a really useful framework.
Okay.
Bloom's taxonomy categorizes questions based on the cognitive skills they require, ranging from basic recall to higher order thinking like analysis, evaluation, and creation.
So how would a teacher actually use Bloom's taxonomy in the classroom? Could you give me an example?
Absolutely. Let's say you're teaching a lesson about the Civil War.
Okay.
A lower level Bloom's question might be, what year did the Civil War begin?
Okay.
This simply requires remembering a fact.
Right.
But to move up the taxonomy, you could ask, what were the underlying causes of the Civil War?
Right.
Now students have to analyze and interpret historical events.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this works.
Yeah.
And the higher you go on Bloom's taxonomy,
Yeah.
the more complex the thinking becomes.
Exactly. And the
Amazing.
beauty of it is that you can use this framework to intentionally craft questions that challenge students to think more deeply about any topic.
It's like teachers have this secret weapon for unlocking student potential.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned another strategy earlier.
Yeah.
Something about the relationship between questions and answers.
Yes. The question-answer relationship strategy encourages students to think about where the answer comes from.
Okay.
Some answers are explicitly stated in the text,
Right.
while others require you to infer, connect ideas, or even draw on your own experiences.
Okay, so it's about being aware of the different ways we can find answers.
Yeah.
And the type of thinking required for each.
Right.
Is there a practical example you could share to illustrate this?
Imagine you're reading a short story with your students.
Okay.
A right there question, where the answer is directly in the text, might be, what is the main character's name?
Okay.
But then you could ask a think and search question,
Okay.
like what are the character's motivations?
Right.
To answer that, students would need to piece together clues from different parts of the story.
That's a cool way to get them thinking like detectives.
Oh.
So we've got Bloom's taxonomy for different levels of thinking and the question-answer relationship for thinking about where answers come from.
Right.
What other tools are out there?
One really powerful technique is the question formulation technique, or QFT.
QFT. I like it.
Yeah.
Sounds very official.
It is, yeah.
What's the basic idea?
It's a structured process that guides students through the steps of generating their own questions. They start with a focus statement, then brainstorm as many questions as possible.
Okay.
Then they categorize those questions as open or closed, practice transforming them, and finally prioritize the most important ones to explore further.
It's almost like they're becoming scientists, designing their own research inquiries.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And the beauty of the QFT is that it shifts the ownership of learning to the students.
Right.
They're not just passively receiving information, they're actively shaping their own learning experience through the questions they ask.
I love that. It's making me wonder, though, what about those kids who are naturally shy or hesitant to speak up in class?
Right.
How do we encourage them to participate in this questioning culture?
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
Creating a safe and inclusive classroom environment is essential.
Right.
Students need to feel comfortable taking risks, asking out there questions, and even making mistakes without fear of judgment.
So it's about building trust and fostering a culture where curiosity is celebrated,
Exactly.
not stifled.
Great.
This is all starting to make so much sense.
Good.
But I have to admit, I'm still a bit stuck on the idea of math as a question-driven subject.
Okay.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more? I'm really curious to see how it works in practice.
Of course. Let's dive deeper into that world of mathematical inquiry in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the power of questions.
I'm ready to keep exploring. Before the break, we were talking about how to make math more question-driven. It's a pretty big shift from the way most of us learned it.
It is.
So I'm curious to hear more.
It is a shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
But think about how limiting it is to view math as just a set of rules and procedures. When students are encouraged to ask questions, math becomes a dynamic process of discovery.
Right.
It becomes about understanding the why behind the what.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Can you give me a concrete example of how this might work in a real classroom?
Let's say students are learning about fractions.
Okay.
Instead of just teaching them the rules for adding and subtracting fractions, a teacher could start by posing a problem like, imagine you have half a pizza and your friend has a third of a pizza.
Okay.
How much pizza do you have together?
Okay, so it starts with a real-world scenario that makes the concept relatable.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then instead of immediately jumping into the algorithm, the teacher could guide students to ask questions like, can we represent these fractions visually? Or how can we break these fractions down into smaller, equal pieces?
It's like they're creating their own path to understanding, rather than just following a predetermined route.
That's the key.
Yeah.
And through this process of questioning and exploring, students develop a much deeper and more flexible understanding of fractions.
Right.
They're not just memorizing steps,
Right.
they're building conceptual understanding.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I bet this approach also helps students see the connections between different mathematical concepts.
Absolutely. When students are encouraged to ask questions,
Okay.
they start to see the interconnectedness of mathematical ideas.
Yeah.
For example, they might realize that fractions, decimals, and percentages are all different ways of representing the same thing.
It's like that aha moment when you realize that everything is connected. So we've talked about using questions to transform math learning. But how does this questioning approach translate to other subjects?
It's applicable across the board. Think about history, for instance. Instead of just memorizing dates and names, students can use questions to delve into the complexities of historical events. They can ask, what were the different perspectives on this issue? Or how did this event shape the future?
It's like they're becoming historians, analyzing primary sources and piecing together different narratives.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And in science, questions can drive experimentation and discovery.
Okay.
Students can ask, what happens if we change this variable? Or how can we design an experiment to test this hypothesis?
It's turning them into little scientists, right? Testing theories and drawing conclusions based on evidence.
You got it.
Okay.
And in language arts, questions can deepen students' engagement with literature instead of just summarizing the plot. They can ask, what is the author trying to convey through this character's actions? Or how does this theme connect to my own life?
So it's about reading between the lines, making inferences, and finding personal connections.
Right.
It's amazing how this questioning approach can transform the way students learn in any subject.
It's a simple shift in mindset,
Yeah.
but it has profound implications.
Right.
And the really exciting thing is that it's not just beneficial for students.
Okay.
Asking good questions is a valuable skill for anyone,
Right.
regardless of age or profession.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's like a lifelong learning superpower.
It is.
So for our listeners who are feeling inspired to cultivate a more questioning culture in their own lives, where should they start?
I'd say the first step is simply becoming more aware of the questions you ask yourself and others.
Yeah.
Are you mostly asking closed questions that limit thinking?
Oh.
Or are you opening up possibilities with open-ended questions? Just noticing those patterns is a huge first step.
And then from there, it's about consciously trying to incorporate more of those open, thought-provoking questions into your conversations and your own thinking process.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
but-
don't be afraid to experiment with the different strategies we've discussed.
Yeah.
Try using Bloom's taxonomy to guide your questions. Think about the question-answer relationship when you're reading or researching.
Right.
And if you're feeling really ambitious,
Yeah.
give the question formulation technique a try.
It's all about finding what works best for you and your learning style.
Right.
And remember, it's a process, not a destination.
It is.
We're all constantly learning and evolving our questioning skills.
Well said.
Thank you.
And as we continue to refine our ability to ask insightful questions,
Yeah.
we open up a world of possibilities for deeper understanding, creative problem solving, and meaningful connections.
I love that.
Yeah.
And speaking of meaningful connections, we haven't even touched on how this questioning approach plays out in project-based learning.
Right.
I'm really curious to hear more about that.
Project-based learning is a perfect example of how questions can drive deep and engaging learning experiences. Shall we delve into that in the next part of our deep dive?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right, we're back and ready to explore how this whole question-asking thing works in project-based learning.
You know, it's funny how perfectly these two concepts go together.
Yeah?
Project-based learning is all about students tackling real-world problems, and what better tool for navigating complexity than a good question?
It's true. And I remember a few of the sources mentioned these things called essential questions.
Yeah.
What exactly are they?
Well, they're the heart of a good project-based learning experience.
Okay.
Think of them as the big, overarching questions that frame the entire project. They're open-ended,
Right.
thought-provoking,
Yeah.
and they get right to the core of the topic.
So they're not just about finding a specific answer,
Right.
but about sparking curiosity and driving deeper exploration.
Exactly. It's like giving students a compass and a map and saying, here's a fascinating territory, go explore and see what you discover.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of what an essential question might look like in a real project?
Let's say you're doing a project on climate change.
Okay.
An essential question might be something like, how can we as a community create a more sustainable future?
Yeah.
It's a huge question.
Right.
It is. There's no simple answer.
Yeah.
But it opens up a world of possibilities for investigation.
Right. It gets students thinking about solutions, about taking action, about their role in making a difference.
And that's what makes essential questions so powerful.
Yeah.
They engage students on an intellectual and emotional level, connecting their learning to real-world issues that matter to them.
Yeah, I can imagine that sometimes those essential questions might feel a bit too big or overwhelming, especially for younger students.
Yeah.
How do we make them more manageable?
That's where driving questions come in. Think of them as smaller, more focused questions that help students break down that big essential question into manageable chunks.
So they're like stepping stones,
Exactly.
guiding students along their learning journey.
Exactly. Using our climate change example, a driving question might be something like, what are the biggest environmental challenges facing our community? Or, what are some innovative solutions being developed around the world?
Okay, so those driving questions provide a more specific focus, helping students narrow down their research and explore different facets of the larger issue.
And the cool thing about driving questions is that they can evolve throughout the project. As students gain new knowledge and insights,
Yeah.
they might revise their questions or come up with entirely new ones.
It's like they're becoming co-creators of their own learning experience.
That sense of ownership is so important.
Yeah.
When students are actively involved in asking questions and shaping their own learning, they're much more likely to be engaged and motivated.
It's so different from the traditional model of education, where the teacher is the dispenser of knowledge and the students are passive recipients.
It's a paradigm shift, isn't it?
It is.
And it's not just about the content of the questions. It's also about the culture of questioning that we create in our classrooms and in our lives. It's about valuing curiosity, encouraging exploration, and embracing the unknown.
This has been such a mind-opening conversation.
Good, I'm glad.
It's really made me rethink the importance of questions and the power they have to transform learning.
Yeah.
Any final words of wisdom for our listeners as they embark on their own question-asking adventures?
I'd say embrace the joy of discovery.
Okay.
Asking good questions is an adventure.
It is.
It's about opening yourself up to new possibilities, challenging your assumptions, and being willing to learn and grow along the way.
And who knows, maybe those questions will lead you to discoveries that you never even imagined.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? The world is full of unanswered questions, just waiting to be explored.
So let's keep asking, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what we know.
To a future filled with curious minds and endless possibilities.
On that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this journey of inquiry.